Have someone read James chapter 4, 1 through 17. After reading this, have someone retell in their own words what they heard. In this text, James uses the word adulterous people in context with being a friend to the world. He continues on discussing the spirit within us envies intensely. Take a minute and discuss why you think James uses the term adulterous people here and what it means to be a friend of the world. What are some ways that we fall prey to being a friend of the world? Discuss that in your group. When you were growing up, did you ever hear your parents or the church you grew up in say these words? Don't be a friend of the world. I remember hearing that. We weren't supposed to be worldly, whatever that meant. I always took that to mean don't drink or don't smoke or don't sleep around, and be careful about dancing and no mixed bathing, and be careful what music you listen to. Country music was okay though, because every once in a while they'd mention God or going to church, and country folk are pretty good people. And they had gospel albums. We knew where the lines were for worldliness, and we didn't want to cross them. In my mind, they were clear. But I think my clear lines that I had in my mind may have been a little more subtle than that. According to the context of James, all it takes to be mostly like all of good people around us. It means judging others by the way they look, or the clothes they wear, or by the money they lack. It means focusing on our own selfish desire. It means putting others down. Those things don't seem all that bad. Surely that's not worldliness. That is just kind of how people are. And that's exactly what James is calling our attention to. The way things are not necessarily how God wants them to be. He calls that friendship to the world. And that spirit he calls to live within us, it envies intensely. James goes on and offers a solution to our worldly connection problem. Reread verses 7 through 10. What does it look like for us to practice these verses? In other words, how do we resist the devil, our own selfish nature, and submit humbly ourselves before the Lord? How do we put this into action? In these first few verses, it almost sounds like he's telling us now to be joyful. I read it that way at first. We have a saying in our house, and it's, don't let it rob you of your joy. So for James to say, change your joy to gloom, was a little bit of a shock to my system. We're joyful people, right? As I've looked at this text, I think he's saying move from these worldly connection and perspective that we've been talking about. Grieve, mourn, and wail because of that connection you had with the world. And connect to God. Humble yourselves. Be willing to admit that I'm a broken individual in need of the same loving, grace-filled God as the poor man sitting on the street. That we are all just beggars in the presence of a king. The end of verse 10 reminds us that if we're able to actually humble ourselves, I confess that's hard for me, then he will lift us up. It's a paradigm shift from I've got it all figured out and I'm doing the right thing to not fall into being worldly like those people, to being empty and broken and poor, and being in a humble position just like these people, like those people. It's at that point that God will lift us up. True joy resides in responding to his lifting. My son has this thing that he does every once in a while. He says, dum da dum dum at the end of something that could be considered bad. For instance, I tell his sisters to take this to their room, and he may go, dum da dum dum. Kids, don't do this at your home. By adding those three little sounds, it makes the situation feel so bad. And in some cases, really makes me think about what I'm saying. In some cases, it just frustrates me. The very last line of chapter 4 is a dom-da-dom-dom moment. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins. James doesn't really mix words here. It's very direct. Regardless of what your plans are, what you've prepared for, you see that person, you feel that calling on your heart to go and do. Share with your group the feeling when you read verse 17. How can you personally practice this? And what are some ways that we, as the community life group, can encourage each other to practice this? At the end of your group, pray over your group together.